Hail to the brown and gold, thy sons and daughters hold, in loving loyalty thy colors dear, colors whereby they show what others too should know, that they belong to you, dear old Valpo.
Welcome back to Torchbearers. On today's episode, we welcome Adam Amin, class of 2009, to the podcast. Stay tuned.
Hail to the brown and gold, we pledge thee to uphold, wherever we may be, thy honored name. Through years that come and go, to pay the debt we owe, we'll e'er be true to you, dear old Valpo.
Welcome back to Torchbearers, the Valparaiso University Alumni Podcast. For those of you just joining in, my name is Michael Beaver, class of 2007, and I serve as Senior Associate Director of Alumni Engagement here at Valpo, as well as your host for the podcast. Today, we welcome Adam Amin, class of 2009. We also welcome Stephanie Sepiol Milne, class of 2013, and Assistant Director of Alumni Communications, as our guest host for today's episode.
So Adam, could you share your Valpo story with us? What led you to attend Valparaiso University, and what drew you to the field of sports media?
I didn't know what Valpo was. I kind of got opened up to the idea of going to Valpo because of a friend of mine that had been attending. I'm from Addison, Illinois, originally, a suburb of Chicago. And I was a master of nothing and a jack of all trades in high school and loved to do a bunch of different things and had kind of a lack of direction. Even though I was good at a bunch of things and I was a good student, I just didn't know what I wanted to do. I come from a South Asian background, so there's kind of this stereotype of, well, you got to go into medicine or law or into engineering or science or math. And I enjoyed a lot of those things and I was good at some of those things, but they didn't appeal to me the way the creative side did. I was a big performer. I enjoyed theater. In high school, I was a singer. I played violin. And I played volleyball as well. And a friend of mine from the same hometown, a few years older than me, his mom was my preschool teacher. We went back to our childhood. He had been at Valpo for a year or two and had been working at the radio station. His name was Ken Levica. I think he was the class of 06, if I'm not mistaken. And he kind of set a standard for me in high school. And I kind of followed the same path. He was also a theater kid. He also did local broadcasts on the public access station in our hometown for the high school teams, and played volleyball. So I kind of modeled myself after him. He was a good friend of mine. And my junior year of high school, he had gotten in touch with me during the summer and said, you know, if you don't know really what you want to do yet, think about coming to Valpo. I'm going to be working at the radio station. I know you've tried broadcasting. If that's something you're interested in, I'll help you get on the radio station here. So if that's something you want to do, just keep that in mind. And I kept that in mind. And I got to the point during, the early parts of the second semester of senior year. And I was like, I got to figure out what I want to do. And I thought, all right, let's apply. Let's give Valpo a shot. So I applied. I got in. I didn't know really anything about the school. I didn't know about Bryce Drew. I didn't know about the shot. I didn't know about the great communications and the weather program. I didn't know about all this stuff. It was just my friend telling me, hey, you should come here. So I applied and I got in. And the first time I showed up was for Focus. And I walked around. I was like, all right, I whatever. I'm in. I don't know what other options I got. So I was enamored right away. And then the second time I showed up on campus was the day I moved in, and my brother helped move me in. And I got about an hour or two into moving into Alumni, and I walked to the radio station and I found Paul Oren, who is still a professor there. And he was standing in front of the radio station. I said, hi, Ken Levica told me to come here. What do I do? And he was weirded out, and understandably so, and brought me to the radio station. I don't think I left after that. That's how I started at Valpo.
Wow. Yeah. I was going to ask you if you started with WVUR right away, or if you kind of eased into getting involved there.
I definitely didn't ease into it. I kind of I went right into it. I spent a lot of time at the radio station right away. And my freshman year, I split my time between theater and WVUR. So I got to do the things that I was really intrigued by during my college days, or during my high school days, and transition them into college. I love doing theater. I got to be Tybalt in Romeo and Juliet. I get to play John Hale in The Crucible. Like I still laugh when friends of mine go back to Valpo to do college basketball games and they see the picture that's hung up somewhere. And they're like, "Is this you?" I was like, "Yeah, that's The Crucible freshman year." But I had to choose, and I chose the radio station. I really got close to the people that were already there. Obviously, Ken was there as a senior when I was a freshman, and the people that I met that were mostly a year older than me. There weren't a ton of people in my class from the station, but a lot of sophomores when I was a freshman that I'm still friends with to this day. They were really close knit, and they kind of accepted me and let me do a lot of work individually at the radio station. I did a lot of production stuff. And as a freshman, they allowed me to do a lot of stuff that typically freshmen aren't necessarily welcomed into doing. They let me host games and they let me do updates and they let me produce a lot of the imaging for the radio station. And that was me hitting the ground running with everybody there. And it was a combination of a passion for it that developed very fast. I wouldn't use the word talent for it, but I felt acclimated pretty quickly to what I was doing. And I felt comfortable. And the people there were awesome. So I was kind of sucked in for the next 4 years.
Yeah. How quickly did you realize that could be a career for you? You know, it's something that you knew you liked, but it sometimes takes time for us to realize like, oh, maybe I could make this a job. How soon into the experience did you figure that out?
It didn't take long. I think the first time they let me do a mock broadcast and I got to call a basketball game against Oral Roberts. And this was in 2006, early 06, when Valpo was still in the Mid-Continent Conference and Oral Roberts out of Tulsa, Oklahoma was their big rival. So I got to call one of the home games during that conference season, not on air, just on like a mini disc recorder. That was a thing 16 years ago as well. With my friend Brandon Alexander. I still remember it to this day. We were sitting up in the rafters up on the track at the Arc, and we got to call the game, and I was talking a million miles a minute, and the energy that was involved with it was, I had never felt that. I never felt the energy of 4,000 people in a building, all screaming and yelling, rivalry game. The game was really fun, and I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew I liked it. I knew it was fun. I knew it felt right. So I wanted to do that. I wanted to pursue it. So that quickly, I kind of realized maybe this could be the career. Maybe this could be a career or a pursuit that I really chased after. And that ended up being the pursuit while I was there.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask you a little bit about impactful moments while you were calling games WVUR. It sounds like that was one and that one didn't even air. Do you have another one, a really specific moment that sticks with you, that maybe what you were on the live call, the game that was airing?
It was the first one I did that I actually got to be on the radio for, and Ken was my partner. I was his second, and he was the lead on it. And it was Valpo Indiana State baseball game, and we drove to Terre Haute together with one of Ken's roommates in the back seat, making dumb jokes the whole way to keep us entertained. And I was like, "Oh, is this what this is like?" It was my first time like on the road to call a game, and I was like, "Oh wow!" So it's a long way to drive, and you got to be ready to call the game when you get there, and then you drive all the way back, and you're tired, and it was a bonding experience with my friend, whom I'd known for most of my life at that point. It was a bonding experience, along with being really exciting to call. Indiana State won 9-0, and all 9 runs came in the 3 innings that I got to call. So it was just a strange experience in that sense. But I kind of got hooked that when I knew it was on the air, and I knew WVUR wasn't going to everybody, and this was before they were streaming as well. It wasn't until years later that they would stream everything. Now granted, sports were streamed at that point too, but like I didn't know who was listening. I didn't know how many people, and I didn't really care. It wasn't important to me. What was important was that I got to have that experience. I enjoyed it. I sounded nothing like I sound now. I was doing a bad imitation of my friend, who's got a little bit of a higher tone to his voice. I was just doing a bad imitation of Ken, but I just knew I liked it. And on the way home, the irony of this was that the Chicago Bulls were playing, and Neil Funk was the radio broadcaster for the Bulls at that point. And Ken and I began talking about how much we loved Neil Funk as a broadcaster. And, like I said, that was the spring of 2006. And, 14 years later, I ended up taking over for Neil after my first ever real broadcast on the radio. It's a very strange circumstance that I look back on fondly now.
Wow. That's so cool. That's a really neat tidbit that, you just knew right then. So Speaking of being on the road, after your time as a student, you were everywhere for several years. You talk about some of your credits, you were just all over the country covering so many different sports in so many different markets and in so many different types of media. Could you talk a little bit about that experience? And what was it like to kind of balance the travel, the research for all these different sports that maybe you didn't start out as being an expert on, and the on-air time?
It was a good lesson right out of the gate, and we did a lot of that at Valpo too, because we had the resources and we had the opportunity to do all the games that we got to do. So we got quick lessons on what it was like to try to balance your classwork, your school, your off camera work in your curriculum with the communications department, the radio station. I was one of the folks on the management staff from the end of my freshman year all the way through to my senior year when I was program director. So it was balancing that, which was essentially a job. It felt like oftentimes a full-time job, and the games that we all wanted to do. And I knew that was the pursuit that I was most passionate about, was doing the games. So we got a great lesson from WVUR and from the curriculum and from Valpo right out of the gate. So I felt fairly well prepared to go out and do this. But between junior and senior year, I worked for the Gary Railcats at the time in the Northern League. Andy Viano, who was I think an 2005 graduate of Valpo and was working in the sports information department at the time. When I was a freshman, he had gotten to know my work over a couple of years. So he was the voice of the Railcats. He asked if I would come on, and he's like, I can't pay you, but you can call the games with me, and you can call the middle 3 innings for all the home games. And if you can drive to any of the road games, you're more than welcome to. So I did that during, the time between junior and senior year. And then he hired me as his intern for $500 a month for 4 months the following summer after I'd finished up at Valpo. So, that was right out of the gate. I was trying to work. The next job I had was in a small town in Iowa, Spirit Lake, Iowa, town of about 3,000 people, where I was doing the morning show and then doing the sportscast and then doing the games at night and then doing it all over again, for 5-6 days a week. So I got a quick lesson in how to balance this, and I got to budget my time, and I need to know how to streamline some of the prep, and I need to, spend time at night when I don't have anything else to do, reading about things. And that helped prepare me for the job in minor league baseball in New Jersey. That helped prepare me for all the freelance work that I started to do in those 2 years between calling Division II basketball, softball, tennis, calling Horizon League volleyball. At that point, Valpo had moved to the Horizon League. I was working for the Horizon League Network, which was one of the first streaming platforms for a conference in the country. And I had gotten to know a lot of people in that span. And I'd gone back to Valpo and done the men's basketball games and football games with Todd Eichow. I was his color analyst and his studio host. And I got to go back, and, the AD at the time, Mark LaBarba, recently retired. He hired me back for that. And that was Andy's old job. So I tried to balance all of this as much as I possibly could, but I only had that preparation because of what I had learned in the 4 years that I was at Valpo.
Yeah, well, that's incredible. I couldn't imagine trying to remember how to describe on the court or on the field action for all these different sports. Remember these rules. It's really impressive how you do that. So 2020 was kind of a year of transition for you. You'd been primarily with ESPN, correct? Various capacities, right? And that you left ESPN in 2020 and joined Fox Sports on the MLB call. So for those who may be interested in a career in this area, could talk about that decision-making process a little bit. What made you choose to make that change? And how did your life and career change when you did that?
Yeah, I had worked 9 years at ESPN, and I was starting to look around. My contract was scheduled to be up in May of 2020. And obviously this is before COVID, this is before the pandemic. So I certainly thought about these things like, all right, well, maybe there's an opportunity out there somewhere else. And I had known the people at Fox Sports for a few years at that point. Anytime a contract comes up, you always happen to go talk to somebody and have a meeting or two. And I'd gotten to know the people there, and I had opportunities to maybe leave prior, and I just didn't feel like it was the right time. I didn't feel like the inventory was right. The college football that I was working at ESPN and the basketball that I was working there was really appealing. I got to start working on the NBA. I'd started filling in for the Chicago Bulls at that point, just sparingly for a couple of seasons. And I thought, well, maybe there's an opportunity out there to change the kind of workflow. And suddenly the pandemic hit in the winter and into the spring, and I was kind of like stuck like a lot of people. And again, my worries were far less of a concern than I'm sure other people's were. And I was still in a very fortunate circumstance, but Fox Sports showed up and said, hey, we want you to maybe do the NFL and call Major League Baseball for us. And your workload would be slashed. Your national workload would be slashed significantly. But, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe you can focus on some other things. Maybe if the Bulls are an opportunity for you, where we'd be happy to help, work around that or facilitate that in concert. So because they had kind of shown the opportunity, the inventory was right. Obviously the NFL is a big deal. Major League Baseball is a passion of mine, and potentially the Chicago Bulls job would be a part of that. And everybody would be on the same page to make it work. It was kind of an impossible thing for me to look at and not accept. I just thought this is I don't know if I'll ever get an opportunity that's this perfectly packaged. Again, it's lightning in a bottle, and you hope that you get opportunities like that throughout your career in whatever industry and field you're in. You hope that at some point the right place or the right package or the right money or whatever is important to you pops up in front of you. But when it comes up, like you have to know that you want to do it. You have to be accepting of it, and you have to think about it deeply and compare it and contrast it. And I talked to everybody I could, and I asked people's opinions of whom I trust. And I came to the conclusion that it was the right time, even though we were in the middle of something very frightening and unknown, and we didn't know how it was going to play out. I thought, well, if it's not now, then it might not be ever. So I opted to make that move, and I'm just happy that it kind of played out the way it did, and it worked out the way it did.
Yeah. Speaking of the Bulls, in that same year, you mentioned you'd done some of the fill-in work, and that was prior to 2020, if I recall correctly.
Yep.
Yeah. So, that same year, Neil Funk announced his impending retirement. It was kind of a sad, he never really got to have like that good goodbye until this past year because of the pandemic. But describe that process. So there had been some other folks that had filled in sporadically as well. I imagine that those broadcasts were considered somewhat of an audition for both you and for those guys as well. So describe that process a little bit. So did you know ahead of time that you were kind of auditioning for that role, so to say, and just talk about getting that call?
It felt like it. It definitely felt like an audition. It felt like they were looking, and that Neil was, those 2 years that I had filled in, Neil had said he wanted to scale back. So he basically cut out most, if not all, of the road games that he was doing. So a lot of us who got called in to go on the road, many people whom are now in major positions. John Sadak is now the voice of the Cincinnati Reds on TV. Lisa Byington, who's a good friend of mine, has been the voice of the Milwaukee Bucks. She's the first female to be a full-time play-by-play announcer for a major sports team in America. Andy Dimitra filled in for me again this past year. Jason Benetti is the voice of the White Sox, and he's my main fill-in. The way I fill in for him sometimes, he's my main fill-in on Bulls games when I'm off doing Fox stuff. So a lot of people came in, a lot of talented people. Kyle Draper is now working for the Sacramento Kings. There was a lot of opportunity for a lot of people. So I'm sure if it wasn't an audition for that job, I'm sure it was. But for anybody who stepped into one of those fill-in games, that's a stepping stone. That could be a huge break for anybody who got the opportunity to do stuff like that. So we all took it really seriously, and we all wanted to make a great impression. We all wanted to do as good of a job as we could. Stacey King, obviously the longtime analyst for the Bulls, he tells this story, and it might be apocryphal. I'd like to think it's not. But the first time we worked together, I was the first fill-in at any point of anybody who stepped in for Neil. and it was a Dallas Mavericks game in October of 2018. And I came in hot. I was doing an Ole Miss football game in Oxford on a Saturday, and I was trying to rush to Memphis to pick up a flight to Dallas so I could do the Sunday night Mavericks Bulls game. And I remember seeing Stacey, and he immediately gave me a big hug. And we did one game together. And I'd been doing the NBA for ESPN. I'd called playoff games on radio and TV. I had a good level of experience at that point. And I'm sure that played a role in maybe me getting the job. But after one broadcast, Stacey supposedly told our boss, who's still my boss now to this day, said, he's the one. That's the one. And that's easy to say after one broadcast if somebody does a good job. Maybe somebody else could have stepped in and done a great job that first one, and maybe Stacey would have said that about them. But I was the fortunate one to step in first and hopefully do a good enough job. And we did several games together after that, and I think he kind of maintained that idea. It's like, I think he's the one. He's the guy. So the summer of 19, this is while I was starting to look around. I went in to meet with the Bulls. I don't tell this very often because I feel like I didn't want to say it right away, but I think it's the statute of limitations is good now. They offered me the job the summer of 19 and just said, you can't say a word. And I said, you won't hear a word about it from me. And they said, it's yours if you want it. And I said, yeah, I want it. So I knew that was a possibility. I never wanted to bank on it until I signed a contract and I knew Neil was going to be done. I didn't want to overstep him at any point. But I knew that was a possibility. So I thought that process of the year between them telling me and them announcing me was, I didn't really believe it even in the year leading up to the announcement, until I knew they were saying it and I knew it was official. I didn't want to believe it. And finally it came true June of 2020.
Wow. Well, I believe it that Stacey had an instinct about you because you two have excellent chemistry. It's so fun to watch the games with you guys on the call. And yeah, it's just a great dynamic. And he sometimes maybe will make you sing the Nationwide theme song, and you just have to be fine with that. So
you have to be you have to constantly be on your toes, and hopefully you have to have a quick wit because he has those things and he keeps you on your toes.
Yes. So kind of as we near the end of our time, this podcast is primarily aimed at alumni, but we always hope that some current and maybe future Valpo students are listening as well. So if we have any listeners today that are thinking of maybe going into the field of sports media, sports broadcasting, what advice do you have for those aspiring journalists who think they might be interested in an on-air broadcasting career?
I don't think this is, it's not a science by any means, because if it were, everybody would follow the formula. But I do think there are some very tried and true ways to improve and to accelerate your process. And first is being a student of what it is that you're doing. Not just being a student of the industry that you're interested in, and not just being a student of the subject material, which I know is the easy part. That's the fun part. Everybody says, well, I read all these stats and I know all these stories and I love watching the games. And that's the fun part. And you need to be a student of that too, but also a student of the craft. Can you read enough about it? Can you listen critically enough to other people who you think are good? Not everybody is liked in terms of style or substance in this business. It's a very subjective business. So what appeals to you is probably how you would want to deliver a broadcast if you were in that position. So who do you like? What do they sound like? And why are they good? And what makes them good to you? And the more you can study that and formulate a real outline in your head and figure out what it means to be good at this in your estimation, it makes it easier to apply those things when you actually have the opportunity. You're going to crib note everybody. You're going to take little pieces of anybody that does this job that you like. You're going to, whether it's somebody you grew up with or somebody you watch frequently, or if it's a sport that you like, who's the main commentator for that sport, you're probably going to take bits and pieces from them. And that's okay when you first start. You're trying to formulate, you're trying to figure out exactly what you're going to sound like. And like I said, when I started this at 18, 19, it's nothing like what I sound like now. I'd cringe if I listened back to what I sounded like 15, 16, 17 years ago at this point. And that's okay. That's supposed to happen. You're supposed to evolve and grow, but that starts with being a student of it. I think it's one thing to have the principles. Can you do it in practice? So the more you can do it in practice, the more reps you can get, the more opportunities you can grasp and try to improve on a couple of things every time you have the opportunity to do so and build it cumulatively over a long period of time. I think those are the keys that have helped me. And then in terms of being out there and getting your name out there or whatever, capacity people are doing it now, I'm fortunate that I don't have to push myself as much as a brand or something like that. I don't have to use social media the way I used to, but putting yourself out there, can you put your best stuff forward always, bet your best impression, your best quality of work, and how you treat people. That it comes down to that too. People want to help, people want to look good, and they want to make other people look good, but they're only going to want to do that if they feel like you're invested in them and they're invested in you. And they're only going to do that if they feel like you're a good person and you're easy to work with. So I think that's kind of the real easy grab bag to kind of pull from.
Yeah. Well, that's great advice. Adam, thank you so much. Before I let you go, I've got a couple just quick little fun questions. I hope you'll find them fun for you.
Yeah.
These are just little things that I was looking over everything that you did, especially at ESPN, kind of the huge mixed bag of sports that you covered. And I have to ask, what is the most niche sporting event that you have ever called? And not to disparage or, make fun of any sport, but just to say, things that we don't conventionally think of.
The 4th of July, Nathan's hot dog eating contest, I think takes, I was going to say takes the cake, but that seems wrong. But that's easily the answer. It is an event unique to itself and only to itself. And I wanted to come in and treat it like any other broadcast. And we tried to do that. And we gave it as fun of a feel as we could. And we got to call a couple of world record performances by Joey Chestnut and Mickey Sudo. And we, had a blast. I had an absolute blast doing it. It's something that it's hard to forget, it's because it is so unique. It's truly a niche. But on the 4th of July, for whatever reason, 1 million people plus always tune in, before they start heading out to their own barbecues or their own parties. There they are at 11 o'clock, noon, whatever it is. And they're tuned in to see it, the craziest 10 minutes in sports. So I was happy to get the chance to do that.
I thought that you might say that. And I will admit, we watch that every year. If there is something so strangely patriotic about it, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, it's fun though. One more. What is your favorite moment in any sport that you've called live?
Man, what's nice and fortunate about having done this now as long as I have is that, and again, you hope that this is the case if you get to do this job, that you get to accumulate moments. And I've been fortunate enough to accumulate a lot of moments that could make anybody's career. And even one of them would be a highlight of anybody's career. And I've just been lucky. And the timing's been good where I got to sit there and watch a few of them, but it's still hard to top Enrique Ogunbowale winning the national championship. That Final Four weekend in 2018 in Columbus is still one of the great memories of my life. And it came after a really tough month. And then there we were sitting on that weekend and she hits a shot in overtime to beat UConn with a second to go. And then 2 nights later, when we're thinking, well, there's no way she can top that, she hits a buzzer beating 3 to win the national championship over Mississippi State. And Enrique and I, in a lot of ways, and I covered Enrique when she was in high school as well during my time at ESPN. Enrique and I and her family and I will be linked for a long, long time. And I'm very happy about that. She's one of the great people I got to interact with as a student when she was at Notre Dame. And I'm rooting for her as a professional now. And she's doing great work in the WNBA right now.
Yes, she is. Well, Adam, thank you so much for joining us on Torchbearers.
No problem. Thanks, Steph.
Adam, thank you so much for sharing your love of Valpo and sports with us. We so appreciate you taking the time to join us here on Torchbearers. To our Valpo alumni family, we love hearing from you. You're why we are here. Send us an email and let us know how you're doing. That email is alumni@valpo.edu. Again, that's alumni@valpo.edu. We appreciate all that you do for each other and the university. And again, while I have your attention, if you're looking for ways to connect with fellow alumni, make sure to check out the links in the show notes for both our regional Facebook groups. Take a minute to sign up and connect with other alumni in your geographic region or field. Also, make sure to check out our newly redesigned website at alumni.valpo.edu. We hope that it is more user-friendly for you. Until next time, go Valpo!
Hail to the brown and gold, thy sons and daughters hold, in loving loyalty thy colors dear, colors whereby they show what others too should know, that they belong to you, dear old Valpo. Hail to the brown and gold, we pledge thee to uphold, wherever we may be.